generosity in our hearts. We're reading today from Mark chapter 7, and the heading in my Bible is the Syrophoenician woman's faith. God is amazing, you know. The town that we're going to talk about today was on a picture on the TV last night. The town of Tyre. And Israel bombed somebody over there who belonged to Hezbollah. I saw it there on the TV. I thought, that's amazing. And it made me think about God and his all-knowing. When Jesus was walking down the road to Tyre and Sidon, he knew that this morning we'd be studying this chapter. Does that get you? That gets me, I tell you. Let's read. And from there, he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and to throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way, the demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and Sidon and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, begged him to lay his hands on him, and taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears and after spitting touched his tongue and looked up to heaven. He said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, "He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." May God bless his word.
Amen. Thank you, Neil and Jared and Shane, for everything you've done. We are looking through Mark, the Gospel of Mark. And last week we were privileged to hear from Dan, and it was a great blessing. I thought he did a great job in talking to us about the first half of the chapter that we didn't touch on this morning. We looked at it last week. And I wanted to remind you a little bit about what he said there, because he did say a few things that I hadn't quite realised, and I did want to reflect on them briefly. So it says there in the early part of Mark 7, the Pharisees and some so-called experts in the law had travelled from Jerusalem up to the Galilee where Jesus was, and that's some 160 kilometres, Dan mentioned. And 160 kilometres is a long way, and they didn't have fast trains or cars, and they only walked, you know. So I don't know when the last time you walked 160 kilometres was. It was a little while ago for me, or maybe cumulative over my life, maybe, something like that. So these guys had travelled that distance. They were on a mission. This is the point that Dan made. It wasn't a casual, bump into someone down the street. They were on a mission, these Pharisees and proposed experts in the law. What was their mission? They were there to judge, they were there to expose, they were there to divide. They wanted to see Jesus and catch him out at something. They wanted to find a problem, something that he was doing wrong. And they found something that they thought that his disciples were doing wrong. They had eaten without their hands being washed. And Dan said that, that was one of the, and in fact they even said, why is it that these guys aren't following the traditions of our elders? The custom of washing the hands was based on a rule or a law in Exodus chapter 30, which says that Aaron and his descendants, the priests, should wash their hands before they approach the altar and before they go from the altar into the house of worship, the tent. And the Pharisees had decided, as Dan said, to create a bit of an extra buffer to be extra safe, to make sure we didn't sin at all, and build this fence a bit further out from where the law was, and said everyone needs to make sure they wash their hands in a whole range of different ways, and particularly about eating. And these experts in the law, what they were doing, they were building traditions to bind people to their own expectations. Traditions that they were using to create their own expectations and discern from good and evil. Ever heard that before? Now, don't get me wrong, boundaries are a good thing, and I do want to be very clear about this. Boundaries are a good thing. We all need boundaries, personal boundaries, physical boundaries, legal boundaries, cultural boundaries even. There's a saying, good fences make good neighbours, and that's a true thing. We need, as Christians, to know what the boundaries of right and wrong are. And here's an exhortation in 2 Timothy, flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faithfulness, love and peace, in company with others who call upon the Lord from a pure heart. But what the Pharisees had done is they'd taken a valid law about priests washing between the temple and the altar, made their own traditions and developed rules that created separation. And they voided the key principle. In fact, the key principle, love your neighbour, and love your neighbour as yourself, even Leviticus says. Now, I don't want to be too critical of the Pharisees for a minute, because we all tend to do that. We all create boundaries. What do you mean, Steve? I don't act like the Pharisees. How can you possibly justify them? Well, I'm not really justifying them, but we all have good principles that we sort of form into our own internal laws, and those laws become our practices. And then we use those, or maybe not use them, but they become things by which we judge other people, and we decide whether or not they're a good Christian or a good neighbour or a good person. Can you think of any yourself? I know one such principle is that we should look after our body. You can see clearly that I do a lot of that. And we should be fit and healthy, right? This, back in the day, was told to me that, our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and so we need to look after it. And I'm not denigrating that at all. We do need to look after our bodies. But back in the day, the expectation was Christians, good Christians particularly, don't smoke or chew or go with girls that do. So they don't smoke. That was sort of the rule, written or unwritten, because it was bad for your health. Now, I'm not promoting smoking, right? But I remember I was driving along the M1 one day going north. I don't think it was called the M1 in those days. I think we just called it the Bruce Highway or something pretty boring. I was driving north, and as I was driving along, I don't know if I was moving a bit faster than the rest of the traffic. You can draw your own conclusions. But I saw up in front of me a car that I recognised. It was my brother-in-law's car. And I sort of thought to myself, I was pretty happy about that. I went, oh boy, I'll be able to sneak up on him, come up beside him, and go, beep, beep, hey, how you going? And have a bit of a surprise and a moment catching up. I wasn't going to his place. We were just sort of heading in the same direction. And I thought that'd be cool. But as I pulled up towards the car, I saw that he had a cigarette in his hand. At that time, I didn't even know that he'd smoked, right? He was a Christian and came to our church, and all of a sudden I felt quite a bit awkward. It's like, he's sort of just in front of me and just there, and I went, what do you do here, It's like catching him in adultery. And I wasn't sure how to engage or to react. I didn't want to surprise him, make him feel awkward, and I felt awkward. I wasn't sure, how it would go. He maybe sort of, could be a bit unsafe or something. But I also thought, I'm sorry that he's concealed the fact that he's a smoker for perhaps fear of rejection. These are the invisible barriers that we can build. So at that stage, I sort of backed away, slowed down maybe to the speed limit or a bit below, I'd imagine, because he was clearly not going to the speed limit. So I backed away, and I missed an opportunity to connect with him. I don't think I've ever mentioned to him that I sprung him, but and I don't think he smokes now, and I don't know if or when he gave it up. How many times have we missed the opportunity to connect with our neighbour, with our friend, or with someone because of our perceptions about what is right and wrong and what they should or shouldn't be doing, and whether or not we don't think of it like we're better than them or whatever. We just want to be pure, What are the unwritten laws that we have about we can't do this and we don't do that? In Christian circles, it might be King James only. People have fallen out of fellowship with me because they say the King James is the only Bible, and I'm saying, hey, I get a lot out of not all the other, but a lot of the other versions as well. We have pet doctrines, Calvinism versus Arminianism, and many people know where I stand on that, and I'm very strong on it. But I don't think you're going to hell if you're on the other side of the fence, necessarily. How do we worship? How do we take communion? Where do we have the communion table? These are things that can be barriers about how we worship and what we do. Do Christians have tattoos? If you've got a tattoo, I'll go on the other side of the coffee shop. Jesus was not like this. He doesn't respect the lines that we draw ourselves, right? The cultural lines, the social lines, the religious lines, and the personal lines. He doesn't respect those lines. And I think today's passage is drawn alongside that story of the Pharisees and rulers of the law or experts in the law that we talked about from last week. It's juxtaposed with that to show the difference between the religious and the Christians and Jesus. And we need to learn from that. It's a beautiful but even unsettling lesson that we have today. So we're going to look at today's passage with the intent to smash through those boundaries and barriers so that we can get around them or maybe walk right through them ourselves, bringing healing, hope, and the fellowship of the gospel to the community around us. So the first aspect of Jesus in this passage is that he entered the region of Tyre and Sidon. This is the first border crossing in our story. In your Bibles down there in verse 24, it says, let me get there. He arose from thence, went into the borders of Tyre and Sidon, and entered into a house and would have had no man know about it. As Neil mentioned in the reading, the boundaries between Israel and Tyre, or which is now Lebanon, are even stronger than they were back in the day, perhaps. There was free travel between them. It's about 50 kilometres as the crow flies from Galilee into Tyre. If you look it up on Google Maps, it's actually about 300 kilometres because you have to go down and around through Jordan and up through somewhere else and all the way over because you can't go there straight away. Such are the boundaries that we have today. Some boundaries are physical and very visible. Some are not. They're invisible and they're man-made, and we have them in our own hearts. If you grew up in first century Israel, even though the boundaries may have been lesser, it wasn't a casual trip that you took to go from Galilee over to Tyre. Tyre itself was a place that was known for Baal worship in the Old Testament. Jezebel came from there and was heavily associated with there. So it was a place that was a bit of an enemy of Israel in a way. And it wasn't a casual thing that they would actually go there. I understand when the religious Jews, even these Pharisees and the experts in the law, if they travelled from Jerusalem up to Galilee, they actually went by a long and circuitous route. Do you know why? To avoid passing through that icky spot we call Samaria, right? And they didn't want to pass through there because those guys are a bit of half-breeds. They're sort of half-Jewish. And they've corrupted the law, and they did. They invented their own ways of worshipping, which were against what Moses had told them to do. But the righteous Jews wouldn't even go there. They would bypass it. So good Jews wouldn't go into these areas. Jesus smashed through that boundary. He just crossed straight over that boundary and went to where he was needed. He didn't follow those historical norms, the prejudice or reputation. He walked the road less travelled and went there to deliver his mercy. Notice this, Jesus was intentional that he travelled outside the accepted borders. This will be a bit important as we look a bit further into this passage. He went there and he went into a house planning to be unnoticed, but his reputation had preceded him. And a bit like a policeman that's off duty and he sees a crime, he's not off duty. Jesus, when there is a need and he can deliver mercy, he is there to meet that person, even though he may have been looking for a rest. Mark gives us a brief description of this woman. He says that she was a Syrophoenician woman. Another gospel calls her a Canaanite woman, and that's because the region of Canaan and Syrophoenicia are similar. Syrophoenician means Syrian, Phoenician, so there are two sort of mixed cultural groups there, I guess. Syria is directly north in where is now Lebanon. Phoenicia was a little bit more to the east, and Syrophoenician. Phoenicia, I think, is where Nineveh was, so again, not people who they liked, like Jonah. Let's go the other direction. So this person, she had 3 strikes against her name. First, she was a woman. In those days, women were somewhat marginalised. She was a Gentile, and she wasn't just an average Gentile. She was a Syrophoenician Gentile, so she had 3 strikes. And she was on the low end of the Jewish hierarchy. So this is the first border or the second border that Jesus crossed. First he crossed the geographic one, and then he had to cross the borders of religious and cultural prejudice. It's easy for us to build these invisible walls and keep the outsiders out. We might not say it out loud, but we do have these prejudices that keep people from experiencing God's grace. Now, Timon told me about a movie, and I haven't seen it myself, but I want to relate the story because it's a great story. Jesus Revolution. Has anyone heard that movie or seen it? Yeah. Couple? Yeah? So it tells the story of the Jesus people of the 1970s, and in particular, the story of founding the Calvary Chapel at Costa Mesa under a guy, Pastor Chuck Smith. Now, I don't know this guy or the story, so I'm going to read a little bit of what Timon has passed on to me. The first time you see Chuck in the film was as a pastor of the small and struggling church. He and his wife were sitting on the couch watching TV, and the news is on, and it's talking about the world situation, images of war, political upheaval, a new generation of people who sort of stood against a lot of that stuff. It's completely foreign to our concept, isn't it? These things don't happen today. But these were the hippies, and they were disengaging from society, practicing free love, experimenting with drugs. None of that happens today. And all of that flashed across the screen, and Chuck was sort of looking at it, and he's going, what on earth are these people about? He saw the outside, the drugs, the hair, the music, everything, and he didn't even realise his own personal prejudice. he'd probably written them off as people that were beyond hope, beyond a cause. You know, question for us is, who are today's hippies? Who are the people that we would write off? Who is it that we would say they're beyond hope? Ones that would never know Jesus. But Jesus doesn't respect the lines that we draw. In this passage, Jesus crosses those boundaries, and then if you look back into this story, in verse 26, the woman, a Syrophoenician, besought him that he would cast out the devil or the demon from her daughter. And Jesus said something that has troubled me for a long time, even until just really coming to... When I was given this passage, I sort of went, I don't want to get onto that because this is a difficult statement. Jesus said to her, let the children be fed first, for it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. It sounds pretty harsh. It's like Jesus is calling her a dog. Does it sound like that to you? I don't know. I felt pretty uncomfortable. Now, we're a long way away from Israel physically. We're a long way away from it chronologically. We're not in the first century anymore. Culturally, we're worlds apart. So we don't quite appreciate the way they spoke and the way they communicated. We don't really understand it, but we need to understand that Jesus wasn't actually calling this woman a dog as a racial slur. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I understand that the word for dog here in this passage is a diminutive term. Anyone know what that means? Neither did I. I had to look it up quite a bit and understand it. So a diminutive term is a term sort of below or less harsh than the word dog, like you imagine dog. There's other words for dog in the Bible. It's in Greek, it's kuon, which means a wild cur, a wild dog, you know, one of these scavenger dogs that wanders around and eats wherever they can. That's the word that is used in 2 Peter, where it talks about the dog returning to its vomit, right? Someone or something that is completely unclean. This word that Jesus used here is more like puppy or pet dog, something that's in the house. It's kunarion, something inside the house, inside the family even. Jesus wasn't referring to the Canaanite or Syrophoenician woman as a dog, either directly or indirectly. He wasn't using a racial slur, but he was making a point about the priorities that he had been given from God. And he may well have been offering her a test of her faith. It's actually a beautiful response that she comes back with. She says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Has anyone got a dog here? Anyone? You got a dog? Yeah, a couple of dog lovers. There are two types of people in the world. Those that love dogs and those that should love dogs. I'm a dog lover, and we have a dog in our house, and I grew up with dogs. One thing I do know is that if dinner is on, the dog wants to be there with you. Why is that? There's no place they'd rather be than under the table, hoping for, perhaps even expecting some food to come their way, right? This is our dog. Something else that I know is that kids, sometimes even their parents, to the shame and disgrace of their wife, even the kids and even the parents sometimes like to feed the dog when it's under the table at dinner. I've heard stories of some of the kids trying to shuffle the stuff that you have to eat your dinner. Well, I've got a solution for that, and they feed it to the dog. So the dog is sitting there expectantly, looking for food, and the children receive the food from the father, and sometimes they pass that on willingly to the dogs. I think the Syrophoenician woman was saying, yes, Lord, but I know the children of the Father also want to feed those directly in their care. That those that weren't directly invited to the table. When Jesus hears that, he responds with joy. And he look down in 29, he says, for this saying go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And Mark records that she went back and found her child lying in bed and the demon gone. Jesus healed her daughter, poured out his mercy, and crossed those boundaries, the cultural, religious, geographic boundaries, so that his mercy would be experienced. Jesus did this intentionally. It wasn't a mistake or happen chance that he found himself in Tyre ministering to these people. And so we want to be like Jesus. In that story or the movie that Timon had mentioned to me, he said that Pastor Chuck, he said, if God was to bring me a hippie, I'd ask him, what's all this about? Because I really don't understand. And as it works out, his daughter introduced a hippie called Lonnie to this guy, Pastor Chuck. He was a typical hippie, except for the one difference, that he was a Christian. He loved the Lord. And taken aback, Chuck sort of spoke to him and listened as he explained, as Lonnie explained, that the entire generation was actually looking for God. They were looking for love. And Lonnie said, we might seem a little strange, but if you look deeper, if you look with love, you'll see a group of kids searching for all the right things, just in the wrong places. So like Jesus, who crossed the boundaries that we know in this story, Chuck actually refused to give in to the pressure from his church and the members of his congregation and shut the doors on these guys. He actually invited a band, a local band or a hippie type band, Love Song, to start playing in their services. And when the older members complained that they would ruin the carpet with their grubby feet, Chuck washed their feet. So Chuck delivered powerful sermons declaring his determination to make his church a place that can be a home for anyone, no matter what their background or appearance. He said strongly, if you feel like you're an outcast, join us here. If you feel that you're misunderstood or judged, this is where you belong. If you feel ashamed or trapped in something that you have done or that you are doing, you can find forgiveness and freedom here. He invited them in. Some of the older members decided to up and leave. But after this, the church grew rapidly. And so rapidly, they had to set up a tent to meet him. And hundreds of hippies were meeting Jesus and being baptized. Here's a picture of, Here's a picture of hundreds of them being baptized at a beach at Pirates Cove, as it's called, in Costa Mesa. And this was all because Chuck was willing to cross those boundaries, as did Christ, so that his mercy could be poured out. That was the statement. You'll see a group of these kids searching for all the right things just in the wrong place, if you look with love. And see, that's the motivation, I think, that Jesus had in going to Tyre and going outside the boundaries that everyone had set. He loved the world, and God loved the world through him. The next story... The next story talks about Jesus coming back from Tyre and going into the realm of the Decapolis. Decapolis is a long word that means 10 cities. Isn't there a decathlon? 10 events. So dec must mean 10, I guess. My Greek friend tells me. Decapolis, 10 cities. He went there again, not as an accident, but as and with a mission. Jesus wanted to reach the people, and he was saying to the world that I'm not here just for Israel. I'm here for the world, which Israel was as well, but they seem to have lost that idea somewhere along the way. They thought, we need to be separate, so separate we don't even go to these places. Think about those boundaries. And in there, in Decapolis, they brought to him one that was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and besought Jesus to heal him. The they in the story, we don't really know who they are, but I could imagine it was his friends or relatives, family. And they sought Jesus for a healing because he could not. They spoke for someone who couldn't speak. Jesus saw this man who was an outcast. He was separate from society because of his deformity and or his illness or handicap. And those things do create a separation. You know, people, unless they're kids, in which case they go right up to them and say, hey, how come you haven't got any legs? Or something like that. But most people sort of go, oh, I don't want to go anywhere near them. I don't want to offend them or create a problem. And those things create boundaries. Jesus actually pulled this man aside. It says in 33, he took him aside from the multitude. Privately, he connected with him intimately. He put his fingers into his ears, he spat and touched his tongue. He became very close with this man. It was a private healing, a deep and personal touch. He restored him fully in verse 35. Straightway his ears were opened and the string of his tongue was loosed and he spoke plainly. He restored him fully with that engagement that Jesus had. And then interestingly it goes on and Jesus said, don't tell anyone. Imagine if you had not been able to speak for your life and the man that allowed you to speak and healed you and made you able to speak said, don't tell anyone. That would be very hard to hold it back. I would think there's a song I love from Don Francisco. Anyone know Don Francisco? Look him up. I gotta tell somebody, he sings. And not this particular man, but he sings in there, I've got to tell somebody. I've got to tell somebody. When Jesus touches you, whew, you have to get out there and share that. He crosses the borders, he makes that connection, and he does that as an example for us, as well as because he loved them, but also as an example for us. So I appreciate I'm taking a long time. I don't really have a figure on. Oh, there is a clock up there. All right, no excuses then. Okay, Jesus crosses the borders. We're called to do the same. The political borders. Would anyone talk to a Democrat? I don't think so. For those that are Democrats. Would anyone talk to a Liberal supporter? Which sort of means the same. I don't think so, you know. Jesus crosses those borders of comfort, pride, fear and silence to bring love to a hurting world. He stepped out of the friend circles and met with people who were different. This might mean for us inviting a neighbour that's new, someone that we don't really know, into our home or catching up with them somehow. Spending time with people that you may not normally do that, forgiving someone with whom you've got a grudge. Might mean walking into a cafeteria or the office and catching up with someone who's alone and clearly a bit separated. What stops us? Why don't we? It's not about, I've got to discipline myself more to do this or that. It's about having that encounter with Jesus and overflowing with his love. The love that we receive, we share. The reason that we love is because he first loved us. All right, I will move through. It's not a fear problem. It's because we need to focus more on what Jesus has done for us. There's a story that Timon related to me about a man in the Grand Canyon who slipped and nearly fell off, but was grabbed by this guy at the last moment and hauled up to safety. And when asked by interviewers later on, they said, oh, how do you feel about that guy? He didn't just say, I'm grateful to him. He said, I owe him my life. I can't stop thinking about him. Every time I tell a story, my heart pounds with gratitude. This is who we are and what we should be with Jesus. He crosses the borders of comfort, prejudice, desperation in order to proclaim. Look, in closing, I wanted to show you something here. This is some holiday snaps. I always get to share holiday snaps when I'm up here. so you have to sit down. There's only about 3 hours of slides from now until the end. This is, anyone know where this is? Sistine Chapel. So if those of you who've been there, you'll appreciate what I'm about to say. I'd describe this as the world's largest IKEA, because you have to go through 736 rooms, 1,200 different corridors, and 1,600 flights of stairs to get to the Sistine Chapel. It was sort of like, I'll get in there, have a quick look and go. Nope, you've got to go through every other room in the Vatican before you can get there. By the time you're there, you're completely exhausted and all you want to do is go home. So this is the one of 2 snaps that I took, even though you're not meant to. And you can see up on the roof, there's Michelangelo's paintings. And if you look closely, there's one there called The Creation of Adam. Can you see that up there? Here's a closer look. The Creation of Adam. If you look even closer, look at the hands. This is God on the right, in the hosts of heaven, creating man, Adam on the left. And you can see that God's hand is reaching out, stretching to make that connection. Mankind, Adam, on the other hand, is rather casual about the relationship. He doesn't really care. Ultimately, mankind needs to respond to God's touch to receive the life and the love that he wants to give. But regardless of that, God is stretching out. He is reaching out to bridge that gap. Today is Palm Sunday as we head towards Easter. Today is a time for remembering when Jesus entered into the temple on today, Sunday, before his crucifixion. It's the time to remember that God gave his only Son to the world for us to make that connection. Jesus came to be with us, to share with us, to die for us, and to restore and repair our relationship with God. I don't understand it fully, but Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, if there's any other way, God, let's take that other option. But there was no other way. And Jesus said, nevertheless, let your will be done, not mine. Jesus Christ crossed the greatest border, leaving heaven to come here for us. Now let's follow him into the world with that same boundary-breaking mercy. Yes, the world has to respond, but we should be stretching as far as we can to make that connection, reaching out, imploring them to come and worship the Lord. Thank you very much.